there's actually, it's basically a 2-month period of, call it spiritual purification and renewal, but the major ones have to do with the New Year, which is Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Sukkot, which is the Festival of Booths, which we're just now in the middle of. And then there's Simchat Torah, which is when the Torah, when we complete its cycle, and we start anew. So that's the kind of the extrinsic, the external. The internal is it actually is a spiritual pathway for renewal if you're able to log on to what's actually happening and take part in the process. I probably should try to answer more than that. I'll get in trouble.
Anyone else? Mark?
I understand that the Bible was written and interpreted in several different iterations. What about the Quran? Was that, what was that based on? And then as well, you know, you mentioned with the Sikh being the 11th guru. And I was just curious, did those go through several different iterations and translations and interpretations as well?
Very good question, thank you. Actually, one of the things that's very unique about the Quran is, and I think it's a beautiful thing, is that it was revealed over the lifetime of the Prophet, from when he became a Prophet, which was at age 40, till his passing. Throughout his life, and all the challenges that community faced, from those challenges, a verse would be revealed, we believe, from the angel Gabriel, something that's a recurring theme in the monotheistic religions. So it was over 23 years that it was revealed, and we believe that there was many of the Sahaba, the companions, memorized many of them, and they were also written down, and they were put into a formal book, basically at the time, right when the Prophet, peace be upon him, died. So all of it was there. The people who had memorized it, one. Second, in terms of written pieces when it was revealed, and then it was basically, I don't know, published and printed. Thank you so much for following. Once he had passed away, by immediately after. So, and again, it was in phases according to the times, according to a challenge, and that's why we also look at it as saying there is wisdom in it, and to see how did they act or how did they react in certain situations. And this is also one last thing. This is one of the reasons that it's important to have context of a particular verse rather than just looking at the text, because it depends on how it was revealed.
And in terms of the Guru Granth Sahib, it was actually, so I said that that's our 11th Guru. So our 5th Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji, was the one who actually started to compile it. So if you're thinking time-wise, I'm thinking between the 5th and over 150 years. So every single Guru added different scriptures, but the Guru Granth Sahib itself was started to be compiled by Guru Arjan Dev Ji. The Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the 10th Guru, was the one who actually completed it, compiled all of it. And one of the things that I think is wonderful, like I said, it's not just our Guru's Bani, there's actually scriptures from different religions as well, including Islam, including different Kamirs, including just Buddhism. There's even things about Buddhism in it as well. And so, different, depending on, that's, I'm trying to figure out there, that's what I think is what makes it so beautiful, because it can relate to so many different faiths, and that's just kind of why this is so important to me.
When I visited Buddha Gate Monastery, the library there has a room full of scriptures. So how does Buddhism in general view scriptures, and which ones are most important, I think?
The Buddhist scriptures fall into what they call 3 baskets, and so they're kind of 3 different categories of teachings, and the first one is the discourses of the Buddha, and so it's all the discourses that he gave in his 45 years of teaching. And because that was 2,500 years ago, there was nothing written down at that time. It wasn't until after his death that the discourses were written down. But there were people all throughout the years that had memorized all the discourses. And the second basket or category of discourses is it's called the minya. It's the rules or precepts that monastics had to keep. And they were quite extensive, and they also had context, so similar to what you were saying about the texts, that they had to be taken in context. There's more than 200 rules or precepts that monastics would keep, but they were all for a reason. So the Buddha didn't give restrictions or precepts until they became necessary. So there's a whole category of teachings on that. And then there's a third book or basket or category, which is called the Abhidhamma, and it's Buddhist psychology. And it breaks down in a more scientific way the nature of the mind and all of the different categories of the mind and mental states and the way the mind operates. So it's a very scientific approach to his teachings.
Let's move on to the second topic.
In the same order?
No,
somebody else.
I'll go first.
Okay. Megan's great.
Okay, so this one is, what do you do if you find that your personal beliefs are in conflict with the teachings of your religion? Who or what has the last word, the authority for you? For example, issues such as same-sex marriage, gender equality, and life after death. So in Buddhism, I would say that things like a same-sex marriage and gender equality fall under one answer. I would answer in one way, and life after death is sort of different. Buddhism doesn't really comment on societal or cultural choices. It comes from a great place of acceptance for people the way they are. And you wouldn't find any teachings in Buddhism that called same-sex marriage right or wrong, or commented on gender inequality. Well, gender inequality, you could tell stories about how the Buddha allowed women to ordain as nuns, and I guess you could comment on that. But there's a lot of more social rights and wrongs that Buddhism just lets people be who they are. And then something like life after death, there are teachings about that you have multiple rebirths, and you can read about those, you can learn about those, but you're not required to believe in that in order to be a Buddhist. Really, in Buddhism, everything comes from your own internal inquiry, and whatever you discover about the nature of things is what you start to learn as truth. And I did write down one quote from one of the Buddhist teachings, because he actually, as he was traveling around and teaching, he came across one village of people who had several teachers come through, and they were getting confused because teachers were telling them conflicting things, and they were asking him, how do we know who to believe? And so I think this is a really useful quote in how he instructed them. And he said, "Do not believe anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it."
Wow.
And the reason that I wanted to read this instead of paraphrase it is because I think it's quite powerful, and I don't feel like I could have done it justice, but I think it's a really excellent way to live by.
So with regard to this question, it's a little bit different to speak from the perspective of the Network of Spiritual Progressives, but I think, again, coming back to the core values is what it's about, which is what would love do. So when we're looking at same-sex marriage or gender equality, what is loving of another person, of a person and their choices, and giving them room to have their own life experience? Does what they're doing actually harm anyone or not? I think when you're coming to issues that are that harm people, like if you have gender inequality, where some people who want to go to school, for example, are not allowed to because they're girls, or who want to work in certain fields are not allowed to because they're girls, or something like that, then there's going to be a strong critique that love brings to that practice. Likewise, with regard to same-sex marriage, if two grown adults want to be partners, and they're not harming anyone, then love would demand that we support that. And so that's where the critique is really brought on what is loving of our neighbors, also what is loving of our enemies. So it may be that where we might, and I think the culture certainly gets into this, into demonizing some group, you know, whether, and certainly in some places it's been women, it's been people of different sexual orientations, it's been, you know, many of the religions on the panel, certainly, you know, Islam is the most recent recipient of this scapegoating, and so the critique is both personal and social, to really look at, am I doing that? And are we as a culture doing that and just simply scapegoating somebody and not giving them what we would want, the same love and respect that we would want given to ourselves? That's where the critique is. With regard to life after death, my personal perspective on that, again, is like, if love is really at the core of the universe, and that is the core truth, whether we name it God or whether we don't, but see it as the realization of experience. And in the quote, which I love, thank you so much, Megan, that is for the good of all, that is both kind of our founding, you know, in goodness, and our goal in goodness, that trusting that love is at the core of this universe, that whatever happens after death will have that consistency. And so in that way, there's a sense of trust without saying, and I know this is going to happen, but there's an openness based on the trust and love.
Okay. So what do you do if you find that your personal beliefs are in conflict with the teachings of your religion? Well, first of all, I think that if it's your faith, generally your faith and your beliefs are, you don't really believe in something unless you have faith in it. So I would slightly rephrase that and saying, what if, you know, you might have questions about it, or, you know, you have doubts or so forth. And I think, you know, every religion goes through that process, right? Catholics about abortion and, you know, same-sex marriage. I think every religion, monotheistic and major religion, actually goes through that. So that is understandable, but I would, you know, the problem is, unfortunately, that there is culturally many problems in the world, caused by, I think, more, it's confused with religion, but it's really cultural. For example, in Afghanistan, where you have women who might be dressing in burqas, or, you know, in other areas where they are not allowed to go and get an education. If you actually look at the history of Islam, you find that it was a pioneer for women's rights. I mean, in terms of, they had more the rights to vote, in terms of business. Prophet's wife was actually a general in the army, as well as, and she was also one of the major scholars, a judge as well. So I think we conflate culture and religion, unfortunately, all too often. And that if we really look, we find that most of the problems are cultural, and usually it's not cultural in the sense that it's just because of their ethnicity or because of their traditions, but it's also, a lot of it is socioeconomic. If you look at them, for example, it tends to be the poorest countries tend to be the ones who have less literacy, and they tend to prefer that their men go out rather than women and get education, etc. So there is a number of conflating factors that we have to kind of separate out. It's easy to get emotional and say the other. You know, the other, they bring down women, or they bring down this group or that group. But I think when we look at it, we find actually quite the opposite in terms of being peaceful, in terms of encouraging peace and justice, and in terms of giving rights and liberties to people. So it's important to be fighters.